All right, so our first text for this morning is from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the love chapter, as many people know it. Just the second verse, though. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I'm nothing. And then the gospel text is the well-known story of the Prodigal Son. But try to hear it as though you've never heard it. Try to listen with some fresh ears. Luke 15, 1 and 3, then 11 through 32. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. The tax collectors and the sinners were the bad people, or regarded as such. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling. The Pharisees and the scribes were the priests, the holy people, the good religious people. I'm going to start over. All the tax collectors and sinners were coming to Jesus to listen to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling, saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So Jesus told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So the father divided his property between the 2 sons. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property, living recklessly and immorally. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in serious need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. And when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have enough bread and more to spare? And here I am dying of hunger. I'll get up and go to my father, and I'll say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of these hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him, and filled with compassion, he ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. And then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, put it on him, put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let's eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his older brother was in the field. And when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what was going on. And the servant said, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he's got him back safe and sound.' Then the older brother started getting angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, all these years I've been working like a slave for you. I've never disobeyed your command. Yet you've never even given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes back, who's devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed a fatted calf for him?" Then the father said to him, "Son, you're always with me. All that I have, all that is mine, is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost, but now he's found." Just a few slides to let some artwork bring this home to us. Go ahead, Tom. By the way, as we're finding them, this story, I have to invite you all to set aside the obvious patriarchy in this story. As you'll see, the artists often asked throughout history, where was the mom? So, after that one. Not cooperating? All right, we'll come back to it, Tom. Oh, there you go. All right. Maybe not. Give Tom a big round of applause. And we want you to know that when we put it out for volunteers to the rest of you to help out at the tech table, you will be applauded also when it doesn't go perfectly. All right?
O ye of little faith.
There's the father just seeing the son. Go ahead, next one. That's Rembrandt. Finally, the mother. And one more. There's mom again. Okay. So I was telling this story one time to some kids. And I tried to set it up as best I could, and I told the whole story about this, made it a little bit more contemporary, and about this kid who left home and really did some bad stuff, just the worst stuff, and finally came back. And I said, "What do you think that the father would say?" And this one kid immediately, and I said, "What?" He said, "You're grounded for life." Now, let's face it, that's what a lot of us would say too. And it occurred to me that I think that's how emotionally people are afraid. If I really come back to my true self, really take my spiritual life seriously, I'm going to be grounded. I'm not going to be able to have any fun. It's not true. But that sometimes comes up for us. All right, so it's Lent. And the time of our hour is almost up, and I'm just getting started. So first of all, I will cut out some stuff, but you take a nice deep breath and stay here. One of my favorite sayings of Jesus is that when he sent the disciples out into a house, he said, "When you enter a house, stay there until you leave the place." And at first I thought that was kind of redundant. Then I thought, well, it's kind of Zen. And then now I realize, yeah, I'm often someplace physically, but the rest of me is already out the door. So don't you leave, okay? If you got to leave, leave. But I won't take it personally. But otherwise, it's Lent. And one of the things that we do in Lent is try to get in touch with Jesus, to walk with him as we approach Holy Week. We've only got 3 more Sundays left in Lent before there's Palm Sunday and Holy Week and Easter. So I wanted to try to get to the heart of Jesus' teachings. And when I asked myself, if I had to just choose a story or 2 or 3 that would really get right to the heart of what Jesus was all about and why I am so drawn to him, I mean, I love all spiritualities. I study all kinds of stuff. I love all kinds of things. I love Hinduism, Buddhism. They all have truth in them. But I keep coming back to Jesus. And it's because of stories like this. It was the first one that came to my mind when I said, what's Jesus really about anyway? Why? Because to me, this story gets right to the heart both of who God is, according to Jesus, and who we are and what life is like for us. We all, like the prodigal son, usually less dramatically, but we all lose ourselves. I mean, that is the spiritual journey when it comes down to it. It's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. I mean, nobody stays right on it. Even those who long to with all their heart, we all lose it. Once I started getting into this story this week, I realized, okay, once again, there's just too much stuff here. I have learned, it's taken me about 3 years, but I'm learning that, I don't have to get it all in one sermon. We'll come back to this one again and again. This is probably maybe the 3rd time I've hit this story since I've been here for the last 3 years. We'll keep coming back to it because it's that much at the heart and because there's that much there. Every character speaks powerfully to our lives, and I was eager when I first came to this story this week again to remind you how God feels about you. And, periodically I feel like as a pastor, I need to ask you this question. So how is it with you and God? It's another way of saying, so how's your love life? It's a rhetorical question. No one has to answer that, except in yourself. How are you doing right now? Because this story is going to tell you, remind you how God feels about you. The Jewish theologian Martin Buber once said, I've quoted him before, shared this with you. He said, we're never going to understand the God of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, unless we get into the emotional character of God's love for the people, for you, for all of us. It's not just a casual, static thing. And anyone who grew up in a church tradition where God was portrayed as an angry father figure, who seems to be almost looking for an excuse to punish us, anyone who's been around fear-based religion, religions that are about trying to somehow terrorize you into thinking that God loves you. I mean, what made us ever think that was going to work? That God loves you, and you need to be scared to death of God, because if you do the wrong thing, you're going to be punished forever. I mean, what a disconnect. No wonder we lost so many people, especially our young people. Anybody who's been around a church tradition that was too much about doing it right, being right, getting it right. Well, run for your life to this story, if that's been your history. And if that got drilled into you deeply early on in your life, it will probably take the rest of your life to unlearn some of that emotionally. So the prodigal son, among other things, is Jesus' way of saying, here's how it is when the worst thing happens. And most of us aren't the worst, right? So I'm going to skip over some of the worst stuff. I mean, if you're right now wrapped up in something that you know is wrong and feeling pretty lousy about yourself, hear this. You can come home. God is not mad at you. God never has stopped loving you. And we, as a church, are called to try to be a circle of people who will help people feel that when they come here. And the good news is that we can wake up. We can come to ourselves. Okay, I'm going to skip over that part. I also found that there was an interesting tangent, though, that came up for me and that I want to share with you, because I think it's a beautiful expression or illustration of how layered and deep these teachings of Jesus are. We all have this tendency to lose ourselves, to forget ourselves, to wander off. And every spiritual tradition I know of says that meditation is one of the most important practices in the spiritual life. The tendency to wander off, come to ourselves, and come back home is pretty much universal to the human experience. And this is what meditation is really about. In meditation, you get still, you get quiet, and you try to focus on something. It could be a word, could be a mantra, could be a sound, could be the love of God, but you just center on that. Don't think about it too much. And then the whole point is to not think. And then anyone who's ever meditated knows that within about 5 seconds, you're going to start thinking. So then you become aware that you're thinking. In that moment of awareness, oh, there's a thought. I'm thinking. You don't judge yourself. And the deal you make is you let go of the thought and you come back to that central thing. Meditation is practice for life. If we're on the Jesus path, we're trying to stay focused on loving God and loving others. That's the center, but we lose our way. We don't stay focused. Jesus, of all people, understood this. And for most of us, it doesn't take much, right? We wake up early and we have a great intention to have a beautiful, Christ-centered, love-centered, calm, peaceful day. And you get in the car and you're on your way to work and somebody cuts you off and bam, you're gone. And it might be lunchtime before you say, oh yeah, I was going to have a great Christ-centered, loving day. For some of us, you don't even need to get out of the house before it happens. The whole point is we lose it. You keep coming back. You lose it, you keep coming back. That's what meditation helps us practice. It's a metaphor for life. All right. I will give you the abridged version here, but that means you got to stay with me, because the most important stuff I haven't gotten to yet. Something about this parable hit me this week that I hadn't seen before. The story itself is so jammed with meaning, it's easy to forget why and to whom Jesus spoke this word. It said, the tax collectors and the sinners, those who were regarded as unacceptable to God by the religious people, were coming to Jesus. And the religious people were criticizing Jesus for hanging out with these people who were not worthy. And the story was Jesus' way of saying to people who are convinced that they are right, be careful. Be careful that your commitment to being right, doing it right, understanding it correctly, whatever it is, doesn't cause you to forget that what matters most isn't being right. It's being loving. Be careful when you find yourself, even in the name of doing a very good thing, starting to criticize others, or more dangerously, starting to define yourself by contrasting yourself with those with whom you disagree and, worse, look down on. Now, if you just heard that, that should cut you to the quick. It does me. There is something spiritually funky. That's a technical theological term. There's something spiritually funky that happens when we get too focused on being right, even when we are right. What was Jesus about? One of his main points was that religion or spirituality of any kind that loses love will always become abusive. Let me say that again. Religion that loses love will always become abusive. So let's close by asking ourselves where we might be a bit too much like the Pharisees and the scribes in our lives, where we might be most vulnerable into falling into this trap. Usually it's going to be in connection with the thing we care about the most and are most invested in getting right and doing right, and let's face it, we often are right. That's not the point. It's about the spiritually dangerous thing that we often do when we're right. And this, by the way, takes us to the older brother in the prodigal story. All right, so I said this cuts me to the quick. Well, I can get pretty judgmental toward people who preach hellfire and brimstone and who misuse the Bible to hurt people. I have to be very careful how I regard my colleagues in that regard. What do you care about the most? That's where it's going to get you. Those of us who really care about climate change and environmental issues, it's so hard to be passionate about those issues without coming across as the green team police. And this is why I keep saying we'll never deal with climate change as a culture until it's about loving the earth and not just about doing something right. It's hard to stand for justice in any way without having a strong sense that we're right. And again, we usually are. But how do you hold that is the point. Is there space in our meetings for disagreement or for people who are just beginning to think about something and who may not be correct yet, who haven't really thought it through? Can they show up and not be shamed? In our I'm going to be honest, in our racial justice program that we just completed, the second weekend, I made that mistake. We were talking, and I said something, if people of color that I know were with us, they would say such and such. And it wasn't that I was wrong about what I said, but what I said made some people who had said some other things feel like, oh, I must have done it wrong or whatever, and it was hurtful. And I felt really bad about that. I apologized. You get it? Well, if we had more time, I'd talk about cancel culture and how we're at a place right now where it is dangerous on the progressive side that we are getting too judgmental and too invested in being right. It's not that we're wrong. Think about Whoopi Goldberg, what happened to her just recently. She said something that was wrong on The View on television with regard to, about the Holocaust. She said it was not a racially based thing, and people corrected her. Hitler did have a racist component to it. But so she misspoke, she was wrong, she was attacked, and she right away said, oh my gosh, I was wrong. And came out and admitted it. I've been educated. I have been taught on this. I was wrong. I saw this inappropriately. And she came out, and it wasn't good enough. It may destroy her career. Is it okay to be wrong? See what I'm getting at? I'll close with one last story. That progressive music festival that I go to in the summertime that I teach at, it's called the Wild Goose Festival. 2 years ago, Amy Grant, or maybe it was 3 years ago, but anyway, Amy Grant, some of you know who Amy Grant is. She was a big star in the Christian music world for many years. And Amy came out of the evangelical subculture, which was anti-LGBTQ. And part of the church. And Amy went on a journey. And over a lot of years, she rethought what she had been taught about the Bible, and she finally came out and said, you know, I was wrong about that. And when she did, she was invited to come to this progressive festival, which is very, very pro-LGBTQ, etc., to be one of the keynote speakers and to talk a little bit about her own journey and to sing for the group that night in a concert. And a huge contingent of the people there boycotted her presence. They said, "You're too late to the party, Amy. Where you been?" As far as I'm concerned, that reaction to her was more older brother-ish than Jesus-ish. So, okay, I got to end. What a story. It's all about love. That's why I love Jesus. And by the way, the whole thing ends with a party. Let's have more parties. If you get nothing else out of my sermon today, as Pastor Bryan said, we need to have more parties from the, okay? Because celebrating the love that's at the heart of this whole thing, it's what it's all about. Let's never lose sight of that. Amen. I'm done.